Going live. Good morning from Alan and Jeff, and it looks like we've got a little glare issue here above my head here. So let me just turn it. Can you just
that's perfect.
tuck in a little?
Yeah.
Okay. So that was a plot by Republican operatives to make us look silly with the bright lights, right? They're being brutal out there, aren't they?
It's true.
Anyway,
and they should know we don't need any help with that.
That's right. We can screw up all on our own. That's right. So today we're at Julia's Books and Coffee, delicious local coffee from Magnolia.
It's really good this
morning. Give them a shout out.
Yes.
And we are in the wonderful Restore Habitat for Humanity, where we have purged all housing puns from our vocabulary so far. Don't tempt me. Don't start. Oh, Alan. Oh my goodness, I see one coming up.
Mm-hmm. No,
okay.
I'll abstain.
Okay, there you go. So we went to an event last Tuesday in Fayetteville, and it was sponsored by the NAACP, the HCON on Day. It was at the Cumberland Public Library, so I assume that the library was partly a sponsor. But it was a forum for all of the candidates. Dan Bishop did not show, so we're not going to really talk about him very much today. But Dan McCready did show. After all, it was predominantly, if not almost everybody there was probably a Democrat. I doubt. I didn't recognize any Libertarian voters. I don't think Alan recognized any Green voters. I'm certain that it was all Democrats.
It's safe to say, or at least people who would tend to vote Democratic. Were candidates like us not in the race.
Right. So this program is a companion for watching that, because you can see it. It was live streamed on Fayetteville NAACP, and we shared it to our campaign pages, our Facebook pages. So you can see it there. But today we're going to talk about it.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk about our answers. We're going to talk about some of McCready's answers. Because, in watching it, I think I did a pretty good job, and I think you did a pretty good job. But we had some answers that we thought were some formulations that might have been a little awkward. And, of course, there were a couple Democratic people there in the audience who were sort of live tweeting it, and they raised a couple of challenges that weren't actually raised during the debate. So we hope that the sponsors of it will pay attention to our broadcast here and share it on their pages too. Let me take care of that. So first of all, let's start, because there's a number of questions. There's, I think, close to 15 questions. So we've got several pages of notes here. But what we're going to do is, because one of Mr. McCready's themes has been education, and he's on his education tour, and he appealed many times, whether the question was related to education or not, throwing out some of his ideas about state education and accusing the Republicans of wanting to destroy public schools, which is pretty harsh charge. I mean, if Dan Bishop were there, I think he would probably stand up, and there would be a fracas.
It's quite possible.
Yeah. So I guess the first thing I want to say about this is that it's certainly okay to support public schools. As you know, Alan ran for school board, and we also interviewed last Tuesday. We interviewed some school board members.
That's right.
As part of our forum in South Charlotte.
Or candidates, rather.
The candidates, yes.
Right.
Yeah. One of the things that, and I've written about the issue of student debt, which the presidential candidates are talking about, but McCready doesn't really talk about. So he's sort of, when he does discuss this, I think it's kind of frustrating for both of us, right? Because he's kind of focused on, bringing more federal money to the school system. The school system in the state really only gets 10% of its budget.
If that, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I looked up the latest available figures, and it's roughly 10 or 11%. So he's appealing to his Democratic voters, the base voters, who think that, yeah, we need to get our fair share of federal monies here.
Yeah.
So I've been talking a lot, and I'm sorry. So go ahead and I mean that's my angle on his strategy here. He's basically trying to appeal to his Democratic voter base. He's making sure that people who want public schools and like public schools, we're getting our fair share of money. Nothing wrong with that. Although I've got a different approach. But go ahead.
Yeah, and I think that speaks, I think, volumes about how other campaigns are run through the establishment, because a person who's running for Congress should understand that schools, public schools, at least in North Carolina here, are largely, as you said, funded and controlled by state policies and things like that. And our local schools receive funding from the county as well, so that's another thing that comes into play. But when you start talking about schools, and I know this is a person who ran for school board, schools are a very different issue for people than other political issues, because it involves their kids. And people love their kids. And the people will shift their political ideology based on things that make sense for their kids. We can't blame people for that.
No, we can't. Not at all. Yeah.
I think that the establishment candidates understand that, and that's why they're picking a topic that is largely outside the purview of a federal legislator.
That's right. So despite the fact that you and I agree that it would be very interesting to talk about these issues, right, from the standpoint of parents, my kids are both out of school, but yours are in school, and so are McCready's kids, and I think Bishop's got a son who's, I think, out of school. We can talk about these issues till the cows come home, and it's fascinating to think about the way schools should be managed and structured. Yet there's really no room for that on this campaign, because he's just appealing directly to the voters, and he didn't want to hear anything we had to say on any topic anyway. But he didn't want to hear anything we had to say on this topic because a question really didn't come up, right?
Right. In fact, I think this was they gave us an opportunity to talk about a passion issue that we wanted to address once if we were elected to office, and this was the issue that Mr. McCready picked.
That's right. So without further ado, let's go ahead and talk about the questions in sequence, right? So the first question was just the opener, and we gave our little bios, and then the question was, what makes you the best candidate? And from my notes here, I felt that he just sort of spent a lot of time in the military, and he was jousting with people in the audience about the Army and Marines and stuff, and talking about the unity of the melting pot. That's what it's all about, and this whole idea of national purpose. And then, of course, he hit Bishop very hard. So I didn't particularly care for that. I mean, I know it's a military town, but I think you and I, it rankles both you and I that he could talk about that, and then we couldn't really even have a discussion about whether to be unified around military and a strong military purpose in the world is really appropriate, whether we might have different values.
Yeah.
You want to comment on that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that I agree. And I will say that your response to that question, because I've rewatched everything too, I think it's refreshing to me as a voter, whether I would be running for office or not, to hear responses like your responses, because they are, if you imagine a canned response from an establishment candidate, the polar opposite of that, a thoughtful response that calls into question the question itself. I think this was a pattern throughout all your responses as well, is saying, let's think about these questions beyond just how it makes us feel. And as political candidates, we know that it's all about how you make people feel, and not necessarily what you say, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. I think it's good to actually think through these questions and to offer nuanced, refreshing responses. And I think that you did that quite well in your first response and in others as well.
Yeah. And we've talked about this before. There is a tension during these campaigns because campaigners are going out and they want to be liked. If McCready is anything, he's a candidate who wants to be liked, and so he's trying to be very appealing and friendly. But because we're issue candidates and we want to engage him on because he's a major party candidate, he doesn't have room for discussion about issues. So even though we were sort of planted right next to him, after watching it for a second and third time, I came to the same conclusion. He didn't turn to say, Alan, that was a pretty interesting idea. I hadn't thought of that before.
Yeah.
Or Jeff, you're completely whacked. You're completely strange. I don't even understand your argument. He could have said any of that, right? He could have addressed us with objections or agreements, but he doesn't do that. So the annoying part for us watching it is when he says stuff like, I'm going to be reaching across the aisle. I'm going to create unity. We're going to have national purpose. We're going to work together. It doesn't matter where you're from. You can be independent or libertarian or from Alabama or Mississippi or wherever you are, and we're all going to work together. We're all going to go out and work in the military. But here he is. He's sitting next to two candidates of political parties, major political movements in the world, in his own country. But he's not willing to turn and say, that's an interesting idea that you just brought up. I would consider that. Here's why I don't think that can work, or here's how I think we can make that work better.
Yeah.
So that was an offense.
Yeah, I agree. And, and I think that's a sign that's the game.
Yeah.
And it just illustrates how deep things go, right? And I'm not going to get into conspiracy theories and things like that. That's not what I'm talking about.
Right.
I'm talking about the Democratic and Republican machines that run campaigns.
Right.
It's almost like an iceberg, and the candidate is the tip of the iceberg, and they're the ones who are responsible for keeping things on message. And that's what we're seeing in both of these campaigns, both from the Democratic and from the Republican side.
Right. So let's move on to the second question, which was about the Voting Rights Act. And as you know, there's always, I don't know what the portion of its African American population is, but we know that there are a lot of African American communities out there for whom the Voting Rights Act is very, very sacred. And but not only that, the voting franchise is very important. So Alan and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but we both agreed in expansion of the voter franchise. And I used to be sort of a little more stressed out about it. 10, 15 years ago, if you had asked me whether felons should vote, I would have had I think maybe a kind of a conservative response. I would have said, no, we can't do that. They broke the law and all that stuff. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized is that, disenfranchising people, especially people who have interacted with the state in a very negative way, that's not helping my causes. That's not helping my causes one bit. And so please tell us how you answer the audience about this, because it relates to something else you said about incarceration later.
That's right. And I think it's worth pointing out, too. You look at a lot of rural communities. I know that we have, for instance, we have, I think, 2 state prisons in District 9. One is in Polkton and one is in Laurinburg, I believe. Mm-hmm. And, the people who are incarcerated, they're counted as part of our population. Yeah. And yet they can't vote. And so right. When you start looking at the system, and that's what I talked a lot about in the debate was systems. You look at people who've been targeted by the criminal justice system for incarceration. We're disenfranchising people. So I'm for allowing felons to vote. I'm for making sure that felons who've been released can vote, making sure that everybody can vote. And I think the question that they asked as I was rewatching it, it was specifically about provisions that have been removed that require states to ask permission, basically, before enacting any new changes to voting policies that might disenfranchise marginalized groups. And I think that we're both in favor of that, making sure that states do have to ask for permission. I don't want to put words in your mouth, Jeff, but I think we want to expand. What was the phrasing you used?
It will expand the voting franchise,
Right.
because voters, if you feel like voters are disenfranchised and no one's getting a voice, then then that's a problem. So one of the things that I brought up, again, something that McCready didn't bring up because he wanted to focus on the voter fraud, because that's part of the game that's going on. He wants to remind people that Republicans committed voter fraud. But guess what? There's still really serious issues about representation and marginalized voters and disenfranchisement. And that includes, this, ranked choice voting or instant runoff, where, you don't vote for one person, you vote for, you rank order the candidates. So if it's a tie or someone doesn't get a majority, the third place or fourth place, votes go to those voters' second choice.
Right.
And so that gives you a better, that is actually one way of ending so-called spoiler effect. I mean, because since we're frequently called spoilers by entering the race, and a badge we both wear very proudly, I might add, because it forces people to think. It would force people to think about who they want second. Maybe a Green voter is going to hold their nose and vote for. Well, they're going to vote for you, but then they would have to vote for McCready second, right? And they would say he's the most likely to align with my values after Allen, and so we don't know how it's going to turn out, but people would. Their second and third choices matter a lot too.
It's true, and there are ways to game that system too. Just like there are ways to game the current two-party first past the post system. But it requires a level of coordination as well, and I think that something like ranked choice voting does better reflect the will of people, because people don't have binary political will.
That's right. So let's move on to the next question, unless you had something else to say.
I was just going to say, that would be
Okay,
great.
so ICE raids. Amanda read a quote from Anne Frank, which kind of set the tone for these ICE raids. And how would you make changes in immigration policy? What would you do about DACA? And I was the first one to answer this, and I have to confess that I didn't say anything about DACA, even though I made a sort of a general statement that yes, there should be a path to citizenship, and I think McCready actually made. I'm giving him credit for making a couple of good points. I thought it was very compelling when he said, "Look, in 30 minutes with a whiteboard, we could come up to a solution to this problem." That's actually, I think, the smartest thing I've ever heard him say. Just as a persuasive moment, and something that I believe is true, and something that I wish I had thought of to say. All of us in this room, based on our values, we could come up with a solution to this. We could talk about the numbers, we could talk about assimilation, we could talk about security, how to break the back of the bureaucracy. I mean, he didn't go into that level of detail, and I think he might lose his footing if he went into that level of detail. But it's very treacherous. So most candidates are gonna. Anyway, what do you think about that?
So I disagree with you slightly here,
Okay.
and I was tempted to
Excuse me.
to raise this issue
Yeah.
During the forum, but I didn't want to get pugilistic, at least not at that point.
Yeah.
And it's a very politician moment, right? It's like we could get together with a whiteboard in this room, we come up with a solution. That's how simple this is.
Yeah.
But how many immigrants were in that room? How many illegal immigrants were in that room? Should they not be a part of that conversation? So
Yeah. I guess. Again, I'm not scoring him high on having a broad-based, comprehensive solution. I'm just saying that it was to me, it felt like a persuasive moment.
Oh yeah.
For him, even though I kind of hold my nose. I hold my nose when politicians talk. Let's face it. I mean, when politicians are talking and they're oversimplifying, and there is not a lot of depth or content to what they're saying, it's kind of a snore. It's not very interesting. So again, kind of a lost opportunity to turn and say, well, let's talk about border security, and let's talk about the deportation machine that's been going on. Why can't we have? The thing about the fact that there weren't the presence of immigrants, or I didn't see any Hispanics either. who might be affected by this. The fact is that Amanda did read that quote from Anne Frank, and so the tone of the question was, we've got some serious problems.
Yeah.
Anyway, and you talked about, I think your message was also on point with what we're doing around the world to destabilize these other countries, particularly. And I know the Green Party, in many ways, has been much better than Libertarian Party, talking about the destabilization of these countries, the regime change operations, and propping up dictators, which leads to terrible conditions.
Right.
So I give you guys credit for that. So,
Thank you. Yeah.
So let's and just to wrap up this immigration point, I did bring up just sort of the classic libertarian model that which is very much sort of an economist's view. You know, the idea that, hey, if you want prosperity, it's the national and international division of labor and specialization, and you need people to need a lot of people participating to find out what they're good at to participate in this wonderful thing called the market and get the advantage of all the network effects and
Right.
stuff like that, savings and property and stuff like that. So my answer was, I wouldn't say it was canned, but I did get an opportunity to at least educate people on that point of view. So let's go into the next question is healthcare. And then do you support ACA, Obamacare, and why? And what would you do to improve it? And let me just say, I think that McCready started out. So I thought that he made he bashed Dan Bishop, right, for saying Bishop thinks that people don't deserve health care, which is kind of, so he went very negative on Bishop, and then and I didn't think that was very effective. You know, he wants to take coverage away from pre-existing people who have pre-existing conditions. So one of the things I said was, and Alan, you spoke last, but I talked about the features that I liked and the features that I didn't like. You know, I talked about portability and the ACA, and I tried to explain a little bit. And I don't know if I was particularly persuasive, but I tried to make the point that the solution to the problem is not to say, you know, we spend $1 trillion, and so the government's going to take over all that spending and only spend 40% of that, because that obviously has a lot of repercussions about the way the market works. And I should have used just a fairly simple example, is that, you know, a doctor might be receiving, you know, X amount of income per year, or, you know, be compensated for the services that he or she provides. And then the federal government's going to say, you know, you're charging too much, so we're going to charge you 40%. Well, that does a lot. That does a lot to the way they structure their model and they structure their services, and the way that they provide consumer service. So I just think that that's a little bit of a folly. I did manage to throw out my corruption in the drug market and my idea about patents. So that was a point at which it would have been nice if we were actually in a forum where Dan McCready just looked at me and said, "Are you out of your ever-loving mind? Are you saying that you don't want innovation in drugs and massive profits for the pharma companies because they have to put all this capital behind?" And I was ready for that argument, but no such luck. Anyway, go ahead. You were the last one to speak on that issue.
I was the last one to speak, and largely, I stuck to the same thing that I've been saying this whole campaign, which is that we need improved and expanded Medicare for all. And there's not a whole lot more detail that you can go into in terms of outlining this. And I think that was one thing that I noticed with Mr. McCready's responses. He talked about his 7 or 10 page proposal for something that was very difficult to go into in the 2
Right.
minutes that we had allotted. And a big draw, I think, of universal single payer healthcare is that it's something that's very simple. It's a way of simplifying the system. But I will say, to your point about the patent system, this is a conversation Jeff and I have had
Yeah.
multiple times. We've talked about it on this show, but also privately. And heading out before our discussion about bringing open source concepts to the idea of developing new drugs and stuff, these are conversations that are worth having.
That's right. These are good conversations because there are different ways of providing money for large scale, capital intensive benefits are off in the distant future. There's no need necessarily for the government to be just simply guaranteeing cash flow to companies for a long time period. So, and Bernie Sanders, to his credit, talks about this evergreening of patents, right? So, which creates so much money that they're able to suppress information about the older options.
Right.
So I listened to an interview with Bernie last night, and he is very persuasive on this point.
Yeah.
So the next question was about veterans, and of course it is a military district, and we all we're really obliged to talk about the issues that vets face. It didn't come up, but we know that veterans have a high suicide rate. And the other thing that did not come up, which I probably should have talked about, is the fact that Pittenger's office, when he was in office, he was getting 6 phone calls a day. So his guy, whose name is escaping me, I think it was Becker, told me that he's just got piles of files on his desk where people are calling him about keeping appointments, getting appointments, talking to their doctor, getting follow-ups, and so your local congressional office is kind of acting like a broker or service helper when the VA is like the second biggest bureaucracy and they've got these massive amount of funds. So, but still, you have to take up your congressman's time to get these kinds of things. So I didn't say that, but I did talk about my restructuring plan, which is to put some accountability in the system. I mean, to McCready's credit, he did talk about accountability, but once again, it's an opportunity lost because you and I can talk about, well, what is it that creates accountability in government services? Is it, how do you measure something like that? Is skin in the game important, or are rules important? And so what if McCready says accountability? It doesn't mean anything to anybody, right? So you got to put some meat on the bones of that. So anyway, you also had the last word on veterans.
I did, and I see it as kind of two different things that we need to address. From a standpoint of right now, we need to make sure that veterans get the care that they need, the best care that they can possibly get. I see us doing that through Medicare for All, improved and expanded Medicare for All. It's an equitable system that ensures everybody gets the best care they possibly can get. We eliminate this distinction between the VA and then private insurers and things like that. But the other thing that we need to address is the fact that we are just pumping people into this military system to become veterans in the first place. So
I just want to compliment you on that, because that is a very important point, and people did come up to us later. The crowd did have many anti-war people in it, and so you got a lot of credit for bringing that point up of pushing people through this military machine. It's not something that I brought up on the campaign trail, but I'm really glad you're there and bringing it up because it's very critical.
Well, and I can't take all the credit for that because I know that I witnessed this firsthand as a kid, and I mentioned that I came from a small town in Texas, but our state co-chair for the Green Party was somebody who mentioned it to me that it's a predatory thing that the military does. They go into these towns because kids don't have money for college.
That's right.
Yeah.
So predatory is a pretty strong word. I mean, if we say that in a military area that, your recruiting efforts are predatory because as we know, McCready came out with a national service plan, and it doesn't sound compulsory, but it really is, with the goal of everybody participating within 10 years. So that feels predatory to me too.
It does. And I would say predatory, and it's not necessarily malicious. It's just that that's how they operate. If you look at the recruiters, they get these absurd targets. Targets probably not the right word. I apologize. These quotas.
Well, goals,
goals,
because we know that the Army needs to replenish, right? Because it's understaffed now.
Right.
Okay. So we're heading into what would normally be 30 minutes, but we've only gotten halfway through our questions. So we're gonna try to be a little more disciplined, but we're going to probably go for at least another 10 minutes, and we'll try to keep it tight. If you're on your Stairmaster and watching us, so we know when you're running out of energy and running out of air, but you just have to listen. So the next question was the mass shootings and gun reform, and it was just sort of a general question, and we're always happy to answer really difficult questions in the heat of the moment. And I say that sort of ironically because that's pretty much the exact opposite of what I said, which is that, we want to be legislators. We want to be passing laws. So we know that laws passed under pressure. And I was the first one to answer this question when they asked, so which is why I'm talking. The pressure to do something rather than nothing is intense. Yet we know that this frequently backfires. And so we don't want to make a hasty decision to further agendas in the heat of the moment without thinking about it. And I think the real rub right now, and I'm glad this issue has come to the foray, and because this is what I talked about at the end, and I think I probably should have started with it at the beginning, but the idea of red flags, because I'm a big believer in social red flags. In other words, you need to, guess what? You live in a world, and you live in a world with family and friends and coworkers and churches and communities and clubs and whatever else it is that you do. You're constantly interacting with people, and if you identify people in your area, in your sphere of influence that are having problems of despair, medical issues or whatever, the red flag is on you. I mean, it's up to you to identify the people that that are struggling and could, potentially do damage to themselves or others. So where I draw the line is with the legal red flags, right? The idea that we would somehow have authorities that had so much information about us algorithmically, that they would figure out, oh, that Jeff, that guy's on the edge. He's ready to go ballistic. We better send somebody out to his house. Do a wellness check, right? Let's do a wellness check on this guy because he said some really strange things lately. Anyway, go ahead, because
we could just do that.
Yeah.
We could get Cambridge Analytica involved.
That's right. Yeah. We have a little Cambridge Analytica watch that says, warning, warning, you are about to be really mad.
Right. It's like a Fitbit, basically.
Yeah. Unfit Fit.
But this particular question, I think there's not a ton of difference between what Mr. McCready, what the Democratic position is, or at least Mr. McCready's position.
Right. So he said, he said common sense, universal background checks, which, go ahead.
Yeah, and the big distinction with regard to what you commonly hear Democrats talk about and what Dan McCready is saying is he is not in favor of banning assault weapons. That's something that the Green Party is in favor of.
Yeah.
Something I'm in favor of. I mentioned limiting the number of bullets that a weapon can fire. This idea that we don't need anything that can spray bullets at somebody. I know that we've gone through the bump stock situation already. But the other thing that I mentioned is we need to take care of the socioeconomic causes of gun violence. And a lot of that comes back to just that basic hierarchy of needs. We need to make sure that people have housing, healthcare, financial stability, physiological stability. And that's going to help us address those things. We need policies in place to prevent specific types of gun violence, be it school shootings versus shootings where a domestic abuser murders their partner or their ex-partner, because those are two separate problems.
Right. So you're pretty happy with the way you delivered your answer.
I think so. Yeah.
Okay. So let's move on to the next thing, which was extreme weather. You know, it was what would you do to mitigate climate change? And of course, you know, Alan, being the Green Party candidate, he went first. So let me just, from my notes, you know, he said. You know, he said what he needed to say. You know, we believe in balance. We believe in ecological soundness. We believe in a big program on the scale of something like World War II, a Green New Deal, where we're going to end fossil fuels by 2030. And so you went for capitalism's jugular. So were you happy with that answer?
I was happy with that answer, and I have to say I got cheers from the people in the Green Party when they watched that, and they especially loved your response to me saying that we need to dismantle capitalism. Your body cringed, which was
so I'm a legend in the Green Party. Yeah. So my answer, I think, was I want to point out that there was one person in the crowd who was real-time tweeting, who was a McCready worker, really, and he ridiculed my answer on this, and what I would say is, okay, let's sit around for 30 minutes and hash it out. Let's talk about these issues, because I said there are practical things we can do. You know, behind the scenes, you know, insurance companies are figuring out how they can sell catastrophic policies to people, whether they're living on the coastline and they've got fear of water or extreme weather events. So this is a very complex problem. I don't have the solution, but I think that the solution could, you know, experts and scientists and actuaries and people that have a lot more sophistication in this area can figure out where the risks really are. And so kind of let them do their job. Let insurance be insurance. Let the people who think there's going to be something bad happen in the future, let them protect themselves for it. So what I say is that I believe that in the here and now, we have a lot of problems. So I'm just saying, you know, for example, if you look at the top 10 causes of death in the United States right now, you just Google it, top 10 and the causes of death. You look at least 3 or 4 of them, and they are simply related to lifestyle, obesity, and sugar. You know, so I actually think that sugar is rather toxic. So when I mentioned this to Alan, you know, Alan didn't say, "Oh no, you're breaking my whole paradigm." You know, he said, "That's a really interesting point." So the question is, you know, why can't McCready just go, you know, instead of going into this, you know, we're all God's creatures, we need to live, and, you know, we need to be stewards, we need to practice conservation, we need to emulate, you know, Teddy Roosevelt and all this stuff, national parks. Why can't he just say, well, that's interesting how you would rank the risks, what you think is more risky in the current world versus what you think might be risky, you know, 10, 15 years from now.
right.
So I'm going to stick by that answer, and we're going to agree to disagree on that, but we're talking about it.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing, and that's what I mentioned earlier about having responses to questions that are not just, you know, straight out of the can, you know, and it's like to think through an issue like that says a lot.
So then the question was about LGBT and equality and discrimination, and I think that, you know, McCready had the first answer, and so of course he goes right into the bathroom bill. He goes right into Bishop bashing, and he's quoting the Associated Press, and he says, you know, he's lofty, equality before the law, but without addressing discrimination. And so this is where I think from this point forward, some of his answers got dodgier, like he was getting tired and didn't want to talk about it or whatever. But he didn't actually address the heart of the question, which is discrimination law. So I answered next right? And just talked about some of my personal experience and the fact that we're going to the Pride event. But again, I was ridiculed for this, as I always have been, and I always will be, because Libertarian Party and in my personal experience leads me to believe that these discrimination laws as we expand the classes of them tend to be counterproductive, and they tend to, because you don't really know what's in people's hearts, right? And you can't really tell, and a lot of times it's a he said, she said, or who, it's just, you don't know what happened, right? In the case of firing or housing discrimination or stuff like that, you simply don't know what's in people's minds. And so the very, very radical position that people in our movement take is, you do have the right to discriminate. I mean, if someone, if they're hiring someone as a barista here, and the person's got, say, a tattoo on half of their face, the owner doesn't want, you looking maybe scary to some of the elderly people who come in, and they go, you're not quite my style. If you could hide the tattoo and wear a Phantom of the Opera mask. I mean, so this kind of thing happens all the time. We're always discriminating. We're always making judgments about people, and it's terrible that people get harmed in the workplace, and that their careers are undermined. But I think that the corporate world is just very ruthless on its anyway. And if they want to get rid of you, if someone doesn't want to rent a home to you or sell a home to you or do these things, they're going to do it anyway, and they're just going to hide. They're just going to hide behind some other motive. So I think it's counterproductive, because it makes people more dishonest about their true motives. So anyway, I spoke longer than I wanted to speak on this issue. So I'll let Alan have the last word.
Yeah, and I had a pretty straightforward answer to this one. It was, so yes, I do support federal legislation to ensure equality for everybody. I mentioned a few specific bills that could be passed, such as the Equality Act, the Customer Non-Discrimination Act.
Yeah.
And then I spent the rest of the time calling out this talking point, this Democratic strategy, which I think it illustrates the way that the Democrats' whole campaign is being run, which is just structured around criticizing Senator Bishop's state policies that he's passed. HB2 was not really about bathrooms. It was about preventing municipalities from raising their minimum wages, and they used people in the LGBTQ community as a political prompt. But
it was both minimum wages and discrimination.
And it was more than that as well. Yeah, so they created all of this turmoil, I point out, and then eventually they land on this compromise, which still, surprise, surprise, has the provision in there. They basically hit the reset.
Right.
And so,
Well, that was a good discussion.
Yeah.
And it could have been even better had we been able to talk to one another.
Right.
So the next question was about urban and rural development, in particular, how it will affect it was just, I didn't write the details of the question down. I wrote the topic, and it was just about development in the area. And this question has come up several times for me in 2018. And I know you talked about infrastructure as a source of development, and your answer was fairly clear. And then I thought that one thing that I said was I wanted to defend the Republican Party in the state, just from the standpoint of the proof is in the pudding. The state is attracting a lot of people. You might not like it. You might not like some of the things that are going on here, but it's kind of like, best house on a bad street. And I use the example of my sister and other relatives, moving to North Carolina, and the fact that we've got this big growth trend going on right now. I think a lot of people understand that's not a bad thing. It's a good sign. So I do think it's appropriate to give credit when credit is due. Now, you and Dan have a slightly different view. So I'll let you have the last word on this question.
So yeah, and he, to his credit, he did say something which I think resonates with a lot of people. He said, I think he opened his statement with everybody
Yeah.
east of Charlotte
Yeah.
in this district has been completely left behind by
Right.
politicians in Washington D.C. And I know that people feel that way.
Yeah.
And to a certain extent, you can see it. I think if you look at,
Yeah.
and again, this comes back to my response with
Yeah.
infrastructure. You talk to people in rural communities
Mhm.
who can't get their business going because they can't get like the T1 lines or the broadband lines.
Right.
I don't know if it's T1. I apologize. They
You're
can't get the broadband. Yeah, I'm about 20 years behind the times. I'm basically a grandfather. But they can't get their businesses up and running because they don't have the resources that they
Right.
need. You talk about rural hospitals
Right.
who need more support.
Yeah.
There's all these things in these rural communities where development has not taken place. So in that sense, I think that we do kind of agree. I think we have a disagreement,
Yeah.
Dan McCready and I, on how to go about building that up. I see this as building it up as part of that Green New Deal where we would have
Right.
shops in rural communities just like we would in urban places.
Right. So I just want to point out that I think you might be giving him a little more too much credit on that question, because that's when he started rambling and he started saying, "Don't even ask me about Betsy DeVos," which was kind of a stupid remark. And so he was rambling. I'm rambling right now, right? And he was kind of rambling. So it's not the end of the world if you ramble on and don't give a good answer to a good question. It happens to everybody. But I thought he was particularly weak on that. When he just ended up repeating his talking points about getting more Fed funds and getting our fair share and stuff like that.
I mean, he could have been asking in earnest. He could have been saying, "Please don't ask me about Betsy DeVos."
Yeah. So let's talk about the. All right, now we're getting questions from the audiences, and this was a little. The first one was about politicians not paying Social Security. It wasn't fair for them to get pensions, and so Alan, you answered that first about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I said that it's not fair, right? I think that that's the heart of the question. That's what they're really trying to get to, is this idea that politicians, which I'll let Jeff speak to this in just a second because he had a really good response to it. But this idea that everybody else is kind of getting, in more ways than one, kind of screwed over by the system. And then you have politicians who are sitting there getting all the things that they need.
Right.
You hear this talking point a lot about, what is it? You get paid for life in retirement if you're a member of Congress, which is not true.
Yeah.
But it's like, why do you get that if you just serve one term? And it's
Right.
like, it's this idea that Congress people are getting paid when nobody else is. And that's the heart of the question, is like, how can we help people not get ripped off by the system?
Right. So there are a couple different ways to answer this, like, the privileged people in government getting high salaries, for example, benefit packages, which are absurd. And I actually made a remark, which I listened to the second time and I kind of regretted, because I actually like AOC as a persuasive politician, even though I disagree with her and she said some things she had to backtrack from. But the idea about making a joke about her wanting to go from bartender to congressman, it's a little tired, and I probably shouldn't have said it. So, and I hope if I meet her, she forgives me for saying that, because it was just it made me sound like a Republican. And please, I don't like to sound like a Republican.
And the libertarians are just Republicans, right?
Those are fighting words. I'm going to run you off in traffic on the way out of here, just like I did on the way in.
Right.
Yeah, just to wrap this point up, I did talk about the fact that there's nothing wrong with state pensions and teacher pensions and all the different packages. The question is, do we treat our politicians like royalty? No, we have to hold them accountable, and we can certainly. You should be able to write letters to them. You should be able to heap abuse on them. You should be able to ridicule them. And Alan and I both knew the job was dangerous when we took it. So we're expecting, frustrated voters and people who hate politicians to say that we're liars and scalawags, if anybody knows what a scalawag is. But McCready's answer again was, I don't think it was a very intelligent answer. He was just talking about the plight of the poor and politicians should get in the trenches, and his answer was kind of truncated. was getting tired. I didn't think it was a very good answer for him. So so at that point too, I think he was planning to leave. So then they asked us this question about what policy do you want that will help benefit minorities in District 9? And that's when he went on. We talked about this earlier in the show, where he talked about the Republican war on schools, and he's promoting schools, and kids should go to great public schools, and there's a lot of work to be done, and there's a big difference between the parties. But of course, he didn't look to his right to say, we have 4 different views here. So he's constantly positioning himself against the Republican, as if Alan and I were not even sitting there promoting different ideas. So I talked about my student debt plan, which I won't go into here, but I gotta be careful about promoting that. I think that was one of my weaker answers, because it's hard to get people when you start throwing around numbers like 35 billion and how you're going to restructure the teacher pension plans and stuff. You got to be on message. You got to be on target. So if anybody's watching this and they're interested in that, you can go to my campaign Facebook page, but I won't spend time on it now. Go ahead.
It's true. And in your defense, I think that particular event is maybe not the forum for that level of detail.
That's right.
But
That's right. Yeah.
Again, it's a discussion worth having. These are ideas that can be added into the mix that create that churn you need, so that you don't have that group think where we just reinforce our own ideas.
So you were talking about criminal justice and the disproportionate effect on minorities. You were talking about mass incarceration. Those are great issues.
Yep.
Right. Great on this topic. And I did help you. I helped you pronounce the word recidivism. Can you say it?
Recidivism.
Awesome. See, that's how good of a teacher I am. I'm offering very low rates on tutoring. So and you got a big applause. That was a big applause moment for you. So watch it on the original video, because people really responded with enthusiasm to that very powerful message. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So then we got to talk about energy policy, and that's when I went off on a bender on Iran, Venezuela, the embargoes, and I think that was a very fine moment, and because I was reaching out and I was doing a little Beto hand action there, so I was very assertive about this issue, and I was on a roll. And then all of a sudden McCready, got up to leave, and then so I got my thing was truncated, and then he had to make his little closing statement. The one thing that was not in his closing statement was, "Thanks, Jeff and Alan, for showing up and offering your interesting ideas, even though I disagree with them, to everybody else here, because I'm really just running against a Republican."
Right.
So he's not exactly a courteous person. He just talked bromides, health, schools, leadership, and then I had to correct him as he was leaving to point out that there are 4 candidates. So then it was just Alan and I, and so we can race here to the end. We've almost gone an hour, but I think we've covered a lot of good ground.
Oh, yeah, I agree. Yeah.
So there's a question about how infrastructure was hysterically underfunded. So this kind of just goes back to something we were talking about earlier in the program about infrastructure and how we're going to frame the infrastructure problem. And I just talked about my traditional answer on this. My message on this is that, yes, there is accountability at the local level, but as the projects get more complicated and as it goes up to the federal government, it's less accountable, it's more corrupt, and we need ways of dealing with that higher level of corruption.
Right.
And so I think that's a fair answer to this question. And I don't see again, I pointed to the fact that North Carolina is a pretty good state compared to the others. Not perfect, obviously. But comparatively better, and obviously we can do better. Go ahead.
And this was the question, I'm sorry, about.
This was the question about
infrastructure,
and you said you talked a bit about Fed funding.
Yeah. And I think that that's a lot of this comes back to the heart of the Green New Deal, and that's what
Yeah.
we talk about is just building up that infrastructure because everything is connected. It creates
Yeah.
new jobs, creates infrastructure, and it recalibrates that social order so that people can live in like a just world, basically.
Okay.
So we can move on to the
Yeah. So there's really only a couple of questions left, and we'll wrap this up. The question was about impeachment. You got a very short answer. You said yes.
That's right.
Excuse me. And I'm still fighting a little cold, and I made a little cough when you said vote for me,
Right. Yeah.
and I probably wouldn't have done that. That was a little childish, but you just got to roll with me,
That's
people.
right.
So my answer on impeachment wasn't pretty clear, and I don't really have much to add to it other than the fact that I believe that if we're going to do something about the president, we want to do something about the presidency, right? Not just this president,
Right.
because of his exploitation of executive power in what we're doing in the world. So I would take not a personal transgressions and corruption
Right.
approach to it, and none of this fake Russian collusion stuff. I would say, you are an executive with too much power, too much overreach. You've abused it. Now let's have the Congress think back about how we pull this back. And McCready, to his credit, earlier in the program, did talk about executive power.
That's right.
And so, to his credit, he did talk about executive power. Dan Bishop, where are you? Does the president have too much power? What do you think?
Right.
So, but then you also followed up the impeachment question.
Right, I did, and I think I kind of reinforced in agreement with
Yeah.
Jeff. I think my point is that if you're in Congress, impeachment is part of that job, and so you have to be prepared to do that. And I think what we see on both sides of the Republican and Democratic establishment is that they're trying to play it more strategically. They're only willing to do things if it can help them politically, and they're making their moves based on that. And I see this as part of the job that you have to do. So that's why I think that Congress needs to be prepared to do that.
Yeah, and can't disagree with that.
And I think
Yeah,
to your question just now, sorry
Yeah,
to interrupt. You asked, does the president have too much power? I think a Democrat or a Republican would say it depends on who the president is.
and that's bad. Yeah, so that's bad when it's purely a question about team power.
Right.
Right. Yeah. So the last two questions, really the last one was a closing statement. So, and I guess you can watch our final statements because I think they're good. They get to the heart of the matter. And Alan and I talk about what it's like to be out there campaigning and sort of getting vote shamed and getting the kind of grief that we're getting from the major parties and not being essentially taken seriously. But here we are in a democracy. We're at a forum. We're telling people, we're giving you good information. We're giving you good questions, the kind of questions that you should be asking your legislators, your candidates. So if you're not getting a satisfying answer from McCready or Bishop on these topics, we're here to help. And that's pretty much it. So the last question was actually on the Hyde Amendment. And we, I can picture Henry Hyde, the great Santa Claus, happy guy, very much a Christian, far right kind of guy who said, we don't want to use public money for it. But you and I think both came to an agreement, or we're in agreement on this topic that if the government's controlling access and it's something legal, that we can't get in the way of it, right? So the Hyde Amendment kind of misfires, especially under your system, especially under a sort of a Medicare for all system where the government really is controlling sort of the products and the access, right? So it would be even more incumbent on the government, I think, to say, well, it's legal and you can do it. So we can't have bureaucrats behind the scenes like restricting access and creating rules and creating barriers, right?
That's right. That's totally it. And complete agreement. Like we can't, if it's something that you can do medically, so obviously there's distinctions with cosmetic surgery and
Right,
things like
yeah,
that. And
yeah.
we're getting into the weeds, but
Yeah. Well, but those weeds are exactly the kind of discussion we would have liked to have had with the other candidates
Right.
in a more open forum. So, any final points do you want to say about your final statement?
No, I think it was great. It was nice if you watch the recording.
Yeah.
We did kind of a joint statement where we kind of went back and forth a little bit, and I think that spoke volumes about us as candidates and the type of change we could represent if we were to win this election versus a Democrat
That's
or a
right.
Republican.
That's right. And I did point out that Dan Bishop thinks that he has the same kind of entitlement as the Democrats think, right?
Yeah.
So that's the thing that we're fighting against. So we're going to end it. We're babbling now. Thank you so much for watching. See you next week. If you've got any further questions, we're going to be adding a few more items to our calendar because a couple things came up. One in Laurinburg and one at UNC Pembroke.
Exciting.
The UNC Pembroke is a very fun event. I went there last year. I had a great time. A great group of students. Students ask really hard questions. I am telling you, students are like, will throw stuff at you that you had no idea were there. So they're out there. They're thinking. They're doing their homework, and you better be prepared.
I'll be prepared.
You going to be prepared? Okay, we better have a double cappuccino on the way out to that one. Anyway, thank you so much for watching.
I think that was good.